Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events. Together we explore what is really true, and in the process, perhaps we'll develop an antiviral mindset in a world of mental and spiritual decay. I am Luke, and that is Mike across from me.
I'm Mike, yeah.
Today we're going to be discussing Ninja Turtles, social order enforcement, and maybe a little Christian nationalism. It's kind of a perennial topic for the last few episodes. I'm excited to get to it, but not yet. I want to start. Mike, I have a question.
Yeah, go.
This comes from a listener of ours who asked us, why are there so many churches, denominations, different kinds? Why isn't there just one way to be a Christian?
Yeah. And
Is it because our church is the best and they just all get it wrong?
She was representing a question that she had been asked several times as well. So it isn't just an individual, but it is a common question. And if we try to restate what the question is, what's behind the question is, this is supposed to be a religious perspective. God is supposed to be involved. What's true, agreement, peace, love. So why is there all this division and argumentation? And
right.
It doesn't seem to mesh with the claims of what this is supposed to be, right? Freeing you from discord and...
Well, and I think the question sourced from someone who's not a Christian and said, why you guys make it so complicated?
That's what I'm getting at. But I think people who are Christians feel the weight of the same question and ask it. And I think lots of people who are Christians have a lot of questions like this where they don't necessarily want to say it because they feel like, oh, I'm supposed to know this, or this is a question that's not approved of anymore. But they wonder why. And this is one of them, I think. Why are there so many? Why is it so divisive?
Tell us the answer.
Well, we're sharing perspectives here, but mine comes down to fundamentally that it's an intentional thing by God in order to generate an intentional response that he's trying to develop. The intentional thing is that there are divisions. In fact, it says in 2 Corinthians, there's a big argument in the church at Corinth. There's been several arguments. And he says, at one point he says, these divisions, and the actual word division there is heresies. Heresy is not what we think of it today in this original word. It just meant divisions, of which it developed into heretical, like factions.
Now, when I was reading 1 Corinthians recently, and as he was describing it, he started talking about communion.
Yes,
and it sounded even like they wouldn't sit together when they took communion, right? It was like literally they were siding on the room of who gets to worship with whom.
And in that setting, you had people who were hungry, and communion time, they're sharing a meal, but they don't have much. And you had wealthier people, and so there's these divisions that came up. And he says, you guys are missing it big time.
Yeah.
Anyway, he goes through these different responses to that. And one of them, there was, it's necessary for these divisions to occur in order that those who are approved might be manifested or made known.
But see, when you say it that way, it makes me think, okay, some churches, like you want to go down in the list and say which churches are approved or not.
Well, I don't think it's that. I think it's people. It's necessary. What I think that means is that it's necessary that difficulties and arguments take place, factions and separations, not that they're good, but it's necessary that they take place in order that something else might be brought forward. And that something else
the squeezing produces the juice.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And I think that something else fundamentally is love. That so we're supposed to be brothers, let's say, or brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And now I'm supposed to join this family. And in so much that the early disciples of Jesus, one is a tax collector, and another is a zealot who has been in armed conflict secretly. The tax collector has sided with, he's done part of Rome's job. The zealot is trying to overthrow Rome because it's become so oppressive.
Yeah.
And then you get these very disparate groups brought together, and they're called to love each other.
Right.
And all that sets them up by temperament, by background, by things that they've invested time and energy into, is to view each other as adversaries. And so I think what Jesus is trying to do is, what the larger picture is that he allows differences and different perspectives, some that to be resolved, some that will not be resolved, in order that we might work hard to love one another.
Yeah. I can tell you, well, one thing that makes me think of is when you see how divided socially, the disciples, especially the 12 apostles, were from each other. Like they would not have known or cared or been close to each other, except that they all wanted to be with
Yeah,
Jesus.
that's right.
It really then also strikes when he prays and says to the Father, I didn't lose any of them, right? Except for the one, the son of perdition. And so this idea that he held them together.
Yeah.
It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And that's what he wants to do now.
And that's the imagery of lion and lamb, that they'll lie down together. What God is redoing is so significant.
Yeah.
Natural predators, of which one is aggressive and almost unstoppable, the other is so meek, almost defenseless.
Yeah.
They'll
and
live
yet they
together.
get together.
What? What? So I think you actually had a contributory answer to that too, in terms of natural dynamics.
I think of it in terms of why do churches split? Because the only reason there's more than one church is that people in one church at one point said, we got to part ways. And as best as I can tell, because I've been involved in churches where I left, sometimes usually for two reasons. Either there was a doctrinal issue where they wouldn't stand up for the truth, or they were teaching something in error, and when confronted on it, they wouldn't bend, they wouldn't give, and they were in leadership and I wasn't. I'm not here to overthrow churches, so I have to go.
That's right.
Right? The other one is a breakdown of trust. If there's, like, you might teach all the right things, but I just don't trust you. I don't trust you with my life. I don't want to give you my heart to what you're about.
Yeah.
And so when those two things are missing, churches, and maybe I would say there's a third one, and that is mission. And this is actually a good reason churches split, which is you feel called to the homeless. I feel called to a college campus. And we're just going in different directions.
That's right.
We can be in the same church if the church is big enough, but we're always going to be on different wavelengths. And so there does sometimes, in a good way. I remember I went to a mentor who, when I was looking at leaving a church where I was in ministry, and I said, I was laying it out. It was mission and it was trust. It wasn't doctrine. And he said, this is great, Luke. This is great that you leave. And everyone else was saying, this is like divorce. This is sin. Like if you split a church, it's wrong. And he said, no. If you're on a different mission, why would you walk together? You can't get to two destinations on the same trip.
That's right.
And so be at peace and depart in peace with them, knowing that God's calling you there and he's calling them here.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
I think one of the other pieces tagging onto that idea is a little bit of making something too good when we look at the past. If the first century church, which starts out really with about 5,000 people, it starts out as a small city.
Jerusalem.
Yeah, and
day
in
of
Jerusalem.
Pentecost.
And then there's other things, and it's 8,000 quick, and it becomes a mega church right off the bat.
Yeah.
But it didn't function in that capacity of one united church. That was a truth. It also functioned as small groups that met in homes.
Yeah.
And as they spread out to the cities, in this first century development of things, there was the view that there is a unity of this church in this city. So there's a church in Philippi.
And they grew in favor, and they were present in the public sphere.
Something that sees them all as one.
Yeah.
But there is pieces. And
those pieces, often in that early Acts church, those pieces were divided by ethnicity.
There's lots
racial
of things
divisions, even from the beginning.
Even just geography with a non-automotive culture, just walking. And I think sometimes we make it too rosy when we look back and realize there's no way in these churches that God didn't want. There's something beautiful in both expressions about unity, as well as you have your unique things and I have my unique things. And we share a unity, but we go in different direction in pursuing what we think God has for us.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's bad at all, actually.
Okay. I'll let her know. Our friend who asked.
Yeah.
All right. If you're enjoying this episode, go ahead and share it with a friend. Click the subscribe button and leave us a review. If it's 5 stars. I don't think if it's 4 stars, don't lie, but put that 5th one in. It's not going to hurt anybody. All right.
I don't have a problem with 4. Come on.
I have a pop culture question.
You do.
I watched
Is this
recently.
Ninja Turtles?
It is, yeah. So I watched recently. There's a cartoon version of the Ninja Turtles.
Like a new one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I remember watching the trailer and not being excited about it. But then I have like this subscription and it was free on there, and I thought I'm gonna watch it. And it was actually pretty good, right?
Okay.
But I did notice something. There's a trend in Hollywood, and this is what I wanted to bring up. So for those of you who didn't grow up on Ninja Turtles like I did, April O'Neil is the female main character among the 4 turtles, right? And she's always portrayed as redhead and beautiful, and she's a reporter, and everybody sort of likes her around to look at, right?
Yeah.
But she's also feisty and
Lois Lane.
and
Poppy.
she's like Lois Lane. So I was talking to a friend who works in Hollywood, and he happens to be redheaded, and he said his roles for redheads are disappearing. And I looked it up, and he's not lying. That they're taking, and this is not a testament to anyone. Well, it's a testament, I think, to how lazy Hollywood is. Basically, all the traditional roles that are going to redheads, they're just giving them now to black people. And so even in the cartoon, they do it.
Okay.
And so the way Hollywood thinks is all stereotypes, right?
Yeah,
we want a short guy, a tall guy, a fat person, right?
Identity.
Identity,
politics.
everything.
Yeah, that's right.
And because they're sort of allowed to do it,
Yeah.
because that's how they tell their story.
Yeah.
You know, the black guy dies in the midway through and is a hero.
213, where you had to hit certain quota.
Well, I know that
It's
the
their own-
Oscars are now requiring quotas as far
know,
as how
it's
many
their-
characters in the plot and all
What
that.
about when you applied to a school or you applied to work? You had these preferences to right past wrongs.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it's called. I'll think of it again. But it's the same thing in shows. They're
Yeah, yeah,
doing
yeah.
that now. They're
So-
implementing on their own.
So in April O'Neil's character was now
Yeah.
replaced. But what was
Yeah.
funny about it, and this is a little sexist, but it also reminds me of like being a teenager and watching these shows, is they took this sort of like attractive person and they made her overweight, and sort of, and it's a cartoon, and the
yes.
style of the cartoon, everybody's a little funny looking,
Yeah.
but it's sort of like,
There's an
I don't
agenda
understand
there,
it,
too.
right? It's like they don't want anything to be beautiful.
Yes.
I mean, we
It's
were
not
talking about
that.
architecture. I think it is. I think maybe it's not consciously
Okay,
that.
That's a good point.
But
Is
the
it really
desire
that?
to destroy the good, the true, and the beautiful. I think there's an intertwining there.
Okay, so that's a great question. When a negative and a positive, how much is gaining the balance?
Right.
So the positive would be, we want to acknowledge, we want somebody who's overweight. We want to say, look, this is a beautiful. Their weight shouldn't diminish their beauty as an individual. And in one sense,
Why not?
Okay, wait a minute. We could say as Christians, there's truth in this.
I mean, as Christians, we say your outward appearance,
Is
your
not
true beauty
reflective-
comes from the heart.
That's right. And as an image bearer, like Lewis said, you've never met a mere mortal. What's happening is a result of the fall, and we're seeing a destruction. But if there was no fall, there would be no destruction of the outward.
But here's the trick.
Everything would be gloriously beautiful.
The trick is it takes a lot of, I don't want to say effort, but action to be significantly overweight. Now, this character wasn't, right? But we're kind of getting more in general.
Yeah.
And we are seeing beauty companies, Dove soap famously recently is putting forward someone who's morbidly obese as their spokesmodel.
Sports Illustrated, swimsuit edition, we're going to have the
It does.
plus
So part of it
sizes.
seems tied to the transgender thing in some way. That
agree.
like I don't know. I can't put it into words yet. I'm still working on that. But if someone is morbidly obese, it is a sin. Mm-hmm. They're actively sinning against themselves and the image of God that resides within them.
Right, that's right.
Now you can't. I think when the Bible talks about beauty versus not, part of it's talking about wealth, right? That you can afford adornments. Part of it too is some people genetically are just more attractive.
That's correct.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about there's a character issue at work. I mean, you and I both know you have to work really hard to lose any weight.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And if you're significantly overweight, there's habits, there's addictive tendencies, there's all these things. I'm not saying that everybody just lose weight and stop.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
But it is a pattern of dysfunction.
Yeah.
And so to me, to say, well, we're going to honor or glorify patterns of dysfunction.
Yeah. Well, see, now you're identifying the negative side.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that there's a positive and a negative, and it's not always clear where a person's motivations are. Are they just wanting to lift up Lizzo and say you can be beautiful and you're overweight?
Right.
Or is there underneath that this desire to assault beauty that God made?
Well, and not only that, but
And
I think the dysfunction. I think you're right. I think the dysfunction within what we're seeing as leftism expressed in America, part of that dysfunction is the coddling, like everyone's an infant
Yes.
who should get whatever they want.
That's right. That's right. I agree.
And so obesity is a little bit like that.
Yes. And so then,
I mean, that's assuming a lot.
Yeah.
That's a quote if someone wants to get us, right there.
The problem is, even though they're doing this, it's almost like it's enforced from the outside by cancel culture, by a Marxist approach. This is what you shall preach.
Okay, so this was a
doesn't
discussion
work,
point
though.
I wanted to bring up.
People don't actually agree with
They
it.
don't care. Yeah, well, okay.
That isn't beautiful. I don't care if you tell me. I'm not attracted to this person that is carrying way too much weight. They're no longer.
So are you saying when everybody says she's so beautiful, etc., they're lying?
It is the line that is appropriate to say. It is the politically correct line that you must toe in order to function in our current society.
So they are lying.
They
what I'm
are
asking.
lying.
Okay.
Yes. Now,
Which
how much
that
they
does
know,
line up with the is Dylan Mulvaney a beautiful woman?
That's right.
Anyone who says that he is also lying. And that's where it's
I agree
similar.
with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so this leads me to an interesting question, right? So there are several effects that, or I would say areas where leftism is trying to get a hold, or maybe has a hold. And I've noticed them, but I've never connected them. Okay, so one is the public schools. And so leftism has been deeply ingrained into the schools of education for decades, right? Having gone through more than two. I think I've gone to 3 different schools of education. I've seen it. It's everywhere. It's all part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I see educators do, or I see governments do, is also try to incentivize people to leave small towns. Mm-hmm. They want to get them into the big cities so that their kids will go to the big city public schools. Because in the small town public schools, there's a little more conservatism.
That's right.
It's less and less all the time.
Yeah.
I think our local school boards have less and less impact at all, significance.
The spirit of the age is stronger.
It's minimal because there's so much top down from the state.
That's true.
But the thing I've recently thought about is that corporations are now getting fully supported by the left, which was like crazy 20 years ago, that Democrats or liberals would say were pro-corporation, right? The corporations were the enemy. They're corrupt. They're always doing everything for money.
Yeah.
But what you get now at corporations is the social enforcement.
Yes, that's correct.
Which is what you're getting at the school too.
Yep, that's right.
And so I think the social order enforcement, it starts at the universities, now it's public schools, now it's trickling its way up.
Yeah, I think of it as a symbiotic relationship that is developed. The corporate structure is getting the approval from the state and a large measure of funding and greased wheels to move forward.
Yeah.
In exchange, they enforce the narrative of the left, and so you have a symbiotic, destructive spiral. A death spiral is what it's going to be.
So if that's true, I mean, I'm thinking both worst case scenario and maybe just reality. Because if the federal government can wage that much power, can wield that much power, then the next president can wield it in reverse. And corporations should be, in the past they did, resist that. Because a corporation wants everything to be as consistent as possible so they can predict their profits.
I don't know that they can wield it in reverse.
You don't think if DeSantis became president that he could reverse?
I saw an article. He said, I'm going to use the DOJ to go after these Soros attorneys.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to work. The DOJ is it's tiger by the tail.
So, okay, so you're saying the deep state is the one really running it anyway,
That's correct.
so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think if corporations are going all along with it, then they must believe that too. Because then they believe that it's not going to change, even though
the only way would be
someone
to
else
stop
gets
the
in.
government contracts, right? What do they get from it? If they
Well, you know what
can't
it means
get
to
that
give a
anymore?
haircut in a corporate sense?
No.
Okay, so I come in, I'm the new CEO. I'm going to give the whole operation a haircut means top 10% of all employees are fired on day one.
Okay.
And now whoever's underneath that, they become the managers of every division.
Okay.
And so what you're doing is you're saying the reason this place has gone sideways is not because the workers in the factory, it's because the managers had the wrong idea about reality. And so we're just getting rid of them all.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably your only way, right? You can't just say, well, I'm going to get rid of the FBI director and put in a new one.
Okay, so
you've got to get rid of the top brass all the way up.
let's take the Trump syndrome out of it.
Trump derangement syndrome?
Trump derangement syndrome.
Okay.
Because if you talk about it in that way, another dynamic comes into place. Let's just run with DeSantis. You think he could be president. I don't think he has a chance. But let's say he is, okay?
Okay. I mean,
you're saying
it's not 100%. It's not 50. Maybe it's 50.
You're saying the haircut.
Yeah.
If he implemented it, so you don't have Trump derangement syndrome as a part of it. You just have DeSantis.
I think Trump derangement syndrome would immediately go and become DeSantis derangement syndrome.
It becomes something different, not to the degree. Look, remember they called Bush Hitler.
Yeah.
They called Romney when he started running Hitler.
Yeah,
they called McCain.
Gonna put you all back in chains.
So they all they always attack the right, no matter who it is.
Right.
So I agree with you. They would do it. They've already started doing it to DeSantis when they thought maybe he might be. So you're right, it'll happen. But there has been nobody to the degree of Trump ever.
Absolutely. Okay.
I don't think it'll reach that
let's
fever
take your
pitch.
premise either way.
Now, what you're saying is if he did the haircut,
Yeah.
I think there's a potential for that to work in theory. There's another potential, and they say, not leaving.
And that's where you get
Who's going to force me out?
right. That's where you
You
get
and what
military
army?
intervention.
Because I do have army.
Right. Well, that is the difference, though. So there's going to be some strategy there for sure. There's going to be an enormous amount of propaganda and resistance, right?
That's
claims,
right. All the
claims of
media is
Hitler and
against him.
totalitarian.
That's
They're going to
exactly
call him
right.
a
That's exactly right.
dictator. If it got down to you and what army, that is when it becomes civil war.
I know.
That's the hot war.
So
yeah.
Trump never
But it's
pushed
that or
it
lose
that
the
far.
country.
I agree with you. Well, partially I agree with you. Let me just remind you, JFK, he determined he was going to split apart the CIA.
Yeah.
He did not survive that.
Right.
Trump didn't even go that far.
Yeah.
He never
He just
did
talked bad about him
threaten-
on Twitter.
Yes, that's right. But
all
he
he had.
never had any plan that was perceived to be a direct existential threat. Like he's going to, the idea to put this branch in Missouri, this branch in Nevada, this branch,
Right. Decentralize the federal government.
That's just right. I think it's a pipe dream. I think it's a great one,
Right.
but I don't think
This is
it'll happen.
DeSantis' plan. that
Or
you're referring to.
anybody's.
But DeSantis has talked about that openly.
Yes,
Yeah.
he has. It was brought up during Trump's. And when I first heard it, I thought, that's brilliant. I think that would go a long way.
Right.
But how do you pull it off if they say no? And now, at this point in history, they have the power to say no.
So
if they
Trump's
want to.
excuse for doing nothing in this regard was saying, I don't have the power to fire people. That's what he said about Fauci and others.
I don't understand that. I never bought.
And it's
I
a
thought
union
that was-
thing where you have to fire someone for cause and all that. But the workaround,
agree.
I mean, he could have. He didn't
think
want
so.
to,
That's
for
what
sure.
I think.
But that was his excuse.
That was one of his
What
biggest
DeSantis
blemishes.
has said is, my workaround is there's no restriction on layoffs. So I can't go and say, Fauci, I don't like you, you're out. I mean, you could, because it's a federal, especially putting him on the commission that's dealing with it. You can get him off the commission, even if you don't fire him from his job. But even then, if you say, I'm laying off this whole division, what are they gonna, there's nothing they can do. They're laid off, right? If you say, and I heard someone, I don't remember who this was saying what you do is you lay off, say, the entire Department of Ed.
Mm-hmm.
Then you say, we're going to open it up again over here.
For
You can
hiring,
reapply.
Yeah.
But it's going to be in,
Yeah.
Arkansas.
Yeah, maybe that would work. That'd be interesting. Reagan did a similar thing with the traffic controllers. You might.
I mean, I was
They
three,
were.
I think.
I was just about to bring that topic up, and I thought, forget it. They went on straight, and he fires them
Yeah.
because he was so, in a sense, revolted by the mass arm-in-arm action. Try to stop us, and
Right.
he did, and got away with it. I don't know that you could today.
Yeah.
So that gets
I think
back
we're
to
gonna
your
find out.
phrase when the end of civilization. So here's the dilemma. If we view it, which you and I don't, but if we view it in purely human terms of we see a pathway and it's developing a certain way and it doesn't seem to be stoppable, then
Okay.
that is what's going to happen. The problem is with that, and for you and I and what we have to think, that does not take account that there's another king inserting himself
into the affairs of man.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
You're
we
talking
do
about
not,
Gandalf, right?
we do not know what will happen when the kingdom of Jesus is involved, when he decides to make a series of actions, how it shifts things. And I've thought this about China.
You're sounding like a Christian nationalist there for a second. Jesus going to interrupt the political atmosphere?
Well, the way we would interrupt, that I would see him interrupting is probably different from you.
A rapture? No.
No, I'm not into that one. But I've thought about China. There was a season in which it appears China, they're still on a pathway of world domination.
Yeah.
And that replacing American hegemony. And that has made me have different fears and conspiracy theories, and that's its own set of questions. Why do you feel that way, Mike? But one of the things I thought to myself, it seems inevitable, right?
That China will take over.
That's right. But one of the things I've thought is, wait a minute now. Who says, why could there not be a spiritual revival in China? There
Well,
could be a revival. There's a massive church right now.
I grew up That's all I heard about was revival
I know
in
it,
China.
and that was a lot more talked about a few years ago. It's not there's.
Seems
My
to have
understanding
faded.
is there's more liberty now, so the church they're undergoing in China what was called the underground church. They have a disagreement. The disagreement is this: one half of them says stay underground. It was good. We're being persecuted. We need to operate in this way. This is the Jesus way.
Yeah.
The other says we have freedoms to be above ground now. We should take them and
Interesting.
try to influence. It's
So that's not how I heard it. But I'm not disagreeing with
yeah,
you.
yeah.
The way I heard it is their church was divided over we should continue to focus on evangelism and missions, or we should begin to have public influence in the political
Okay,
sphere.
very similar.
But seems like the same idea.
Similar
Yeah,
idea,
yeah, yeah.
just expressed a little different. And I think that's interesting that that's where they are. And so to me, there's been a cooling down of the heat around the underground church in China and how big it is and successful and whatnot. But let's just pretend. But the point being this, you have no idea. We have no idea. It seems that there is this movement of the kingdom of Jesus that kind of keeps going west. It has started out east and over 2,000
I was going to
years.
ask you about this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why did it not go east? Is there a spiritual
I don't know.
aspect to that?
I don't know the why. I've just observed it.
Here's the
In general,
the trick with
there's
that,
exceptions.
though, is the gospel definitely went into India, right?
I know.
It definitely
there's
went into
exceptions.
the
I agree.
Asia,
And
but it kind
Hudson
of was
Taylor,
halted.
China, before it really hit Americas and went into Korea and South America. So
But
there's
it never
always
became
been
a
exceptions.
It never became a cultural cemented phenomena like it did in Europe, right?
That's
Christian
correct.
Europe was
That's
like
right.
Christianity ruled
What
it.
I notice, if you take out all the exceptions, all it is a chart that in general moves a certain direction. That doesn't mean there's not dips and rises. I see it as a wave in general, like if there was a worldwide ocean that is just spiritually swept west in general.
Okay. Okay.
And if that's the case, then the 10-40 window you and I grew up hearing a lot about, it is making inroads even now.
Right.
And what we don't know is that if it makes those inroads, China could take over hegemony with a Psalm 2 kind of thing. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain?
Yeah.
And Jesus overturns it.
Right.
They take this role and America's role in that diminishes and it seems all bad. And all of a sudden God begins to change China and there's a benevolence of his kingdom administration extending out from China in a way nobody ever anticipated. That's possible.
So, no, absolutely it is. Is that's also reminiscent of a post-millennial
It
mentality,
could tie itself
right?
into it
That every
for sure.
nation will begin rule.
But the all millennial could be tied into it too, because in the wake of that wave seemed to be barren dead spots.
Oh, for sure. Well,
Not
Oregon
almost
is-
like they can't be lit again. It's really a strange thing, and it's
I think
don't
often of
understand
it, if it's the salt loses its saltiness,
Yes,
what good is
that
it
phrase.
except to be
That's
thrown
right.
out and trampled? And that's what the church, at least in
So,
America, is feeling like sometimes.
Europe has been worse. I mean, the Reformation and revivals came in Europe.
But I'll
They're a
tell you
dead
that
zone.
Europe is blaming America for the social craziness, right? They
The
see
world
it,
is blaming America.
well, yeah, but Europe is facing some of the same riots and around George Floyd and all that stuff. And they're seeing that its source is
They're
universities in
facing
the
riots
U.S.
around George
They
Floyd.
were in 2020. They had riots, and it was like, you guys are saying we're racist over here. What do we have to do with it, right?
Yeah.
And it was basically just university ideas, American universities, bleeding over.
Yeah.
It's really just communism.
Hey, quick question on TMNT, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
Does your thought include any element of reparations?
I think, no. I think it's fashionability. I think Hollywood says, this is what's fashionable, we're going to do it. And I think the whole thing, because I still think Hollywood is all about how are we going to make money? If they think it'll make more money, they'll do it.
The pudginess. So your point, in a sense, had nothing to do with the character being black, but with the character being pudgy.
No, I think it's both.
Okay,
Yeah.
but pudgy is.
They're
know
both
that,
fashionable to give recognition and main character status to. In the past, they
so
wouldn't have
I
been.
think that's because there's two issues. The one is what's beautiful.
Yeah.
The second is reparations.
Right.
We're going to atone for the sins of our past, and we're going to give more roles to black people than they are represented in the population, or even if the role in the film doesn't call for it, we're going to do it anyway.
I think if you went and asked some of the executives, especially if they're younger, in some of the production companies in Hollywood, they would say exactly what you're saying. They believe, they're true believers.
Yes.
But I think that in the final decision, the old guys who really want to make the money, they're saying they're testing, surveying the public saying, who's going to go see this because it represents, because it's this.
I agree with that. My only pushback on it would be the making of money. I've come to conclude that that is not the primary emphasis of Hollywood, because the Passion of the Christ, remember at the time, was near $400 million. It could make money. No way.
Right.
They'll make money losers. Look at the Oscar nominations. They are, if it is not some destruction of a moral issue, it doesn't matter if it only made 10,000.
Well, I think they still understand that you can't worship God and mammon. And they definitely worship mammon, so they're not going to glorify God. I just think that's
I think, though, they're willing to spend mammon in order to destroy God if they can.
I think there's a little bit of that. Yeah, for sure. The other side of it, too, is that they see their role in society as a degrading, right? They see Christian influence as the enemy of free expression. I think there's that sort of like libertine artist superiority to them. That's
They're
kind
not
of
entirely
accepted.
wrong in that.
Well, I mean, I want to destroy a lot of what they represent.
That, and you don't think you're free to go wherever your imagination might go.
Yeah.
You put constraints on yourself.
Right.
Say, that path is unhealthy. I'm going to say no to that path.
So this reminds me, I've been reading, and actually, we'll make this an announcement. One of the announcements I wanted to make is that I started a YouTube channel and another podcast. It's called the Trinity School Audio Library, where I'm reading aloud some of the books from our library so that kids with disabilities who struggle to, focus and read can listen along, or they can just put it on their iPad or whatever. But I've been going through the Screw Tape letters.
Yes.
And in one of the letters, I think it's letter 12 I recently did, he was talking about how once you get the Christian avoiding the real presence of God and doing sort of pseudo-religious things, you can actually like distract them with nothing. Like early on, you have to distract them with real temptations of pleasure and of sin. But there's a point where now they're just going to stare at a wall if it means they don't have to pray.
Yeah.
Right? Almost anything can distract
Opium.
them from real presence of God,
opium
prayer.
Of the masses. Once you get them on, then they're okay with junk and garbage.
Yeah. But it made me think a lot of this, like how much time, and I get tempted by this a lot, is like how much time am I just scrolling through to the point where I don't even care what I'm seeing and I don't actually enjoy it.
Yes.
I feel like, man, I'm right in there.
That happened to me last night. Literally, when I was looking for the short that Charlie made, the 3 of them, I could only find one. It took me somehow to short clips.
YouTube Shorts is what it's called.
And I saw, there's another one, I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. And I just started scrolling. Pretty soon an hour had gone by.
Yeah, it's shocking.
The whole hour, and it's like, what are you doing?
And each time you're saying, I don't like that one, I don't like that one.
That's right.
Which gives you the illusion of choice. I'm choosing.
Yeah.
But it also creates the anticipation that maybe the next one will be good.
Yeah.
And so there's an addictive, like pulling a slot machine.
I think this is the unrecognized addictive component of technology that has information, and we are addicted like a drug to these images and no thought in our life. Just let it go across the screen.
So here's where I struggle with that, because I totally agree with you, except for the sense that you said it's unrecognized. So 2, 3, 4 years ago, a documentary came out, right, called The Social Dilemma or something like that.
Yep.
Everybody watched it. Everybody talked about it. This is bad. And then we just went back to normal, right? Maybe we put a few more constraints on our kids and their phones, access or whatever, but we're still walking right into it. And YouTube, all Instagram, Facebook, they all have that same swipe short video.
Yeah.
It's TikTok. They're all just mimicking TikTok.
Okay.
And it's that, man, if we get the video short enough and punchy enough, it just draws them in.
Well, so what you're dealing with there, the dilemma is it's recognized at the same time that it's also not recognized. It's addiction.
It's addiction, but it's also this like numbing sleepiness.
I know.
And I think if the desire of the Spirit of God is to wake you up, right? Like we're talking about, we need an awakening in our country, but the only, even the language of awakening, the only thing I hear about it is on the political. I don't hear anybody saying there's coming an awakening. We need an awakening of people seeing their own spiritual condition and the reality around them. It's minimal, or if you hear it, it's sort of fringy, right? It's like the Bethel kind of really emotional people.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. What about, does this tie at all into your thing? You talked last week about in fact, the short that Charlie did was on our talk about media and the occult.
Okay.
The arrival of the occult as an in-your-face form of media.
Yeah.
do you think that will create a growing interest in awakening spiritually, because these are real things that are being played with.
Yeah.
And if their teeth get into the back of your head and when they shake, it's painful. It's going to cost you.
I think maybe one of the other things that came up in that book he was talking about his letters, and if you haven't read
C.S. Lewis,
Screwtape Letters, I recommend it.
They're exceptional.
So one demon is writing to the other, giving him advice.
Yes.
And this demon says, at this present time, we've been commanded to keep our existence secret. But in the future, it will be, he talks about materialist magicians, people who deny the spiritual and yet indulge in the occult.
Yes.
And that when that combines, and he's writing this, 40, 50 years ago? When those two combine,
way more.
He says that's when it'll be the end. And then it will be unleashed.
Yeah.
And that is what you're describing.
Can we seg it all, or do you have can we go to the haunted cosmos?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to connect it to...
Go somewhere else.
No, I think it connects really well. So the idea that connects to me is I was listening to Michael Heiser, who, I don't know if he was ever on Haunted Cosmos, but he was on Blurry Creatures. These are very similar genre of podcasts talking about...
They quote him, Haunted
spiritual
Cosmos.
beings, and how they connect to stories of ghosts and aliens
world, the unseen world.
And Bigfoot and all that.
Yeah.
What Michael Heiser described, because he talked often about the council of the gods, Psalm 82 and Psalm 2 are both kind of refer to this council. You hear about it in Job, and there's hints of it in early Genesis, right? That these beings that God made, angelic beings, you could say, whose role was to protect, to watch over the earth, and even to watch over the nations. There's some evidence that after
Deuteronomy,
Noah, right, that the descendants of Noah became what we think of as the nations, and that each being, and then they rebelled against God. Right, they turned away. They began to follow their own ways.
Yeah.
And now God mocks them in the Psalms, right? He sits in heaven, he laughs. Okay, so what Michael Heiser was then describing is that the fulfillment of the Great Commission, which I would sort of connect to Christian nationalism, we talked about that, right? That making Jesus Lord of every nation, is also spiritual warfare. It's dethroning, or it's taking back the dominion of these beings who say, well, this region, this country, it belongs to me, and I've rebelled against God, so it's mine. And so when Jesus becomes Lord of this region, it's almost like saying, no, you don't. You're on a throne of lies. Jesus is now on the throne, which I think might connect to what you were talking about, cosmic cartography.
Yeah. Well, let me ask about that though. This spiritual warfare, Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
When you see that, just in terms of what you just said, the way you just said it, where would you find the idea that he takes the geography versus, because I keep wanting to say, I'm agree with how you say it, but in my mind, I see him taking the people from the dominion of these beings. I don't see them ever losing. They've lost it at the cross, but they don't get it taken away till the day of judgment.
Yep.
And in the interim, what I see the kingdom of Jesus doing is coming and taking the people out of their kingdom. They still live there, let's say India.
Yeah.
Or let's do the Prince of Persia. I mean, that's true. That's where you have to start breaking it down, and it becomes startling.
Yeah.
But if we just use the biblical phrase Prince of Persia, whatever that means, Iran or Iraq, you have this dominion of sphere geographically with its people. What I see is Jesus coming in and evangelism takes them under his grip, though they still live there, makes them part of Jesus' kingdom, and says, now live differently under that ruler in Persia.
Yeah.
Instead, and what I heard you say is comes and he is taking Persia's dominion and reducing it almost like it's geographically separated, like it's geographically and not just people. How do you hear that? Or,
okay, so
how I'm hearing you.
Yeah, so I think the geographical part is already dismantled by the fact that Jesus says he's now, all authority is his. So I think that is taking the geographic dominion from those spirit beings, but they still are here and they still fancy themselves to be the rulers, but in fact they're not.
Why?
And so
what do you
then,
think when it says the God of this world, that Satan is still called the God of this world, as if his sphere is still his, it's just been undone, and the time in when he realizes it or puts it in effect.
It's so I see it as the fulfillment of the dominion mandate. So there's a parable Jesus tells about a prince who goes off to be made king. And the people in the dominion that he's going to rule once he's made king send messengers saying, we don't want this king. And it says when he comes back, he's going to bring those people before me and slay them, right? I think that's a description of this idea that Jesus is now away. He's been made king, and he has yet to return and really make every knee bow. But at this time, there are people
It's
now.
still his.
There's two kingdoms in this realm.
Yes, I agree.
Authority-wise, it's his.
I agree with that.
But there are still people around who fancy themselves.
That authority.
That's right. And so spiritual warfare, or the dominion mandate, or the Great Commission, the spreading of the gospel, is going into that kingdom and saying, hey, this guy's not really the king. He says he's the king, but he's not. And the real one's coming back. And it's sort of like changing allegiances. Changing allegiances.
Yeah.
Not to take the guy off the throne. He's already off the throne. To show that his throne sits on a...
From the other person's, the prince's perspective, which is the real one, but he's still sitting on the throne in practicality.
He's sitting...
Until the prince comes back and dethrones him, he's still saying, no, this is mine.
He's claiming it
that way.
And because he's there, and only people present are his emissaries, but the actual powerful ruler has yet to return.
Right.
Then he's claiming his dominion, but he doesn't actually have it, which is why you can cast a demon out. And the demon will say, no, this person belongs to me.
Right.
I mean, I've literally had these conversations. And you say, no, this person was bought with the blood of Jesus, and he's now free. And you declare the truth. You establish the authority of the true king of this place, this heart, this person, and then they are redeemed. They are set free.
So when you say it that way,
yeah,
the prince coming back, you're saying evangelism, in this sense, is announcing that there is now the real king has come.
That's right.
What was your king before? Legally is no more.
Correct.
Now, he's still here.
Yeah.
Right.
So imagine you go to the governor of Oregon and you say, how dare you write a law, pass a law, sign it, right, as the governor, that goes against the true king of this place, who is Jesus. They wouldn't even know what to do. But that is the Christian message.
Wait a minute. You're talking about people now.
Yeah.
You've moved out of evagelism. Now you've moved. That's a different message. When you said go to the governor.
Well, it's evangelism to call them to repent.
Okay, you didn't say that. So you're saying you said, how dare you pass a law?
Yeah.
So when you first told it, you weren't having this emissary of Jesus' kingdom come and say, it's not Kate Brown, what's her name? Kotek.
Yeah, Tina Kotek.
Tina, the real king is here. You need to repent, Tina.
Yeah.
Your first version was, Tina, you shouldn't pass that law. Is there a difference there?
Well, a call to repentance is to say you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, but
so I don't see a difference.
Repentance is unto bowing to the real king. There's a difference between that versus unto administrating the other guy's agenda.
Think of John the Baptist, right? He says to the centurion, enforce the laws justly, don't extort anyone, right? He says to the tax collector, give back. He's giving instructions to each person in the place God's put them, including, he says to Herod, stop taking your brother's wife, right? So he's calling to repentance, not just you need to turn to God in your heart or pray a prayer, but also you need to do what's right in whatever sphere of power and influence you have.
I agree with that. So when John says that it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife, he is speaking to
now
Herod.
He's even using law. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's within this Judaistic, it's the law of Israel. What you're doing breaks what God's commands are to our nation state. This is before the covenant changes.
Right.
So it's a legitimate thing. And to me, I see that as a shift then unto the new covenant. So I'm trying to hear you with everything and try to hear what you're saying, but I still find when you say a phrase like, oh no, I don't. And so in terms of Christian nationalism being spiritual warfare, my pushback on that is I just still see, when you said go to Tina and say this law is not the right law of the real king.
Yeah.
I saw that as a political action, which it's not that it's not spiritual, but it's not the primary spiritual warfare. I see it as go to Tina and say, Tina, you need to bow to the real king.
Yeah.
Now, out of that will flow what you do with laws. But
when you say it that way, it almost sounds optional, right?
Well, it's not it is optional until once she repents, then she needs to live that out. But right now she's saying, I don't recognize a king. It is optional.
No, I agree. What I'm saying is
And it's different than John the
one,
Baptist.
I think it's a distinction without a difference, but because we're both saying she should act the same way at the end.
At the end,
based
yes.
on the same action we're calling her to.
She should act that way before, but she's not going to. She's in rebellion to the real prince.
Yeah, which is why she needs to repent and do what's right.
That's what I'm saying. Spiritual warfare, Christian nationalism as spiritual warfare, I don't see that connection except at a secondary way. I see spiritual warfare as fighting for each individual under the sway of this. We'll call him an on paper, dethroned yet still waiting to be removed king.
Power without authority.
Power.
So
the authority's been limited. It's been cut off in some sense.
Well, all authority belongs to Christ.
But he has still left them with some authority.
No, he's left them with power. And he's called us to take dominion, meaning to take back
the power versus authority.
Well,
I have to say that
if someone is a warlord, right? Someone could set up in our town and say, I'm in charge now. And maybe they have enough guns and maybe they have a gang and now they rule. But they don't actually have authority. They just have power.
Well, so this is a difficult one because this gets in, maybe this will be our wrap up for this point because we have some other things to do. But is there a distinction between authority and power? The Greek words are different, right? And so I've been asking myself the question, and I don't know the answer. And I'm not even necessarily asking you today. You could say something if you want, but is there a difference between authority and power? Because there seems to be an element of interchange and an element of distinction. And I'm not really sure what I think about that.
So here's an example, okay?
Because sometimes authority does mean power.
There are a lot of children. There are a lot of children who wage incredible power over their parents.
Okay.
They manipulate. They get their way when they shouldn't.
Okay.
They don't actually have authority.
Correct.
And if righteousness were established, they would submit to the right godly authority that their parents wield over them and the responsibility those parents carry for their upbringing. But they have the power. They do what they want. The parents cower, they submit, they compromise. That's what I see as the difference.
That's the power without authority.
Right.
So I'm not, I see the separation.
But so here's the spiritual warfare, is that there are powerful spiritual beings, and this actually can tie back to Hollywood. There are powerful spiritual beings at work who want to express their corrupt influence through law, through media, through education, right? Through every institution and including down to the family, one parent to the other and to their children. And so those spiritual beings are waging an outsized influence in our political realm right now, such that Oregon laws that protect
parental authority,
that undermine parental authority, that groom children towards sexual deviance, all this stuff, right? That perpetuate mental health disorders. We could go on.
Not even agreed by the majority.
That even the majority of Oregonians
rebels,
say is not right. That's right.
right.
Yeah. Okay. So if we were to go to those people in power, let's say Tina Kotek, and say, Jesus is king, how dare you? And she would say, you're right, I'm going to make a change. Then you would be thwarting the influence, the power that those evil beings are waging or wielding over Oregon and establishing Jesus' authority. And that is the dominion mandate.
But
the goal would never be politics, right? The goal would be righteousness.
Okay.
One heart at a time.
So I like that better.
And then influence that comes from it.
Yeah. The how dare you? Tell me why those words? Why the how dare you?
Well, I think it establishes Jesus. If Jesus is really king and someone says, I'm going to take his throne, there's an offense to that. And I think Christians we've trained ourselves to never be offended, even on behalf of God in heaven. And if you look at the way John the Baptist, as an example, the way he preached is the axe is at the root of the tree. You're going to die. He's going to take you down if you don't do what's right. That's a how dare you type of statement in my view.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with the element of taking offense that there is there's been a loss, that they've lost a certain capacity. But the where I question it is it's the Titus passage, I think, the very beginning, and I don't have a Bible here to read it because this would be a better one to have read. But it says something along the lines of submit to those who are in authority over you.
Okay.
The reasoning is what's so striking, though. It is, for you were yourself were once lost and wicked. And it lists 3 or 4 adjectives there that are startling.
Yeah.
The logic is disconcerting because what it's saying is this. It's assuming that the reason that logic can hold sway, the only reason, is if their actions are wicked and depraved.
Yeah.
You're supposed to submit to them because, remember, you were just like them. Which is interesting because it's basic. It seems to say to me, and you can push back on this if you read it different. It seems to me to say that they're doing things that are unrighteous. And there's an element in which you need to be patient and submit to that.
Okay.
The reason being, you were once greatly unrighteous just like them. But God came and changed your life.
Okay, I'm going to read it.
Okay.
Because this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Titus 3.
Yeah.
It says, and I'm reading in the NAS.
Okay.
For some reason.
The wooden accurate.
Okay, remind them then, it says.
To Titus.
Remind them to be subject to rulers, to authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good deed.
Okay.
To slander no one, not to be contentious, to be gentle, showing every consideration for all people. For we too were once foolish, disobedient, deceived, enslaved to various lusts and pleasures, spending our life in malice and envy, hateful, hating one another. But when the kindness of God our Savior and his love for mankind appeared, he saved us, not on the basis of deeds which we did in righteousness, but in accordance with his mercy, by the washing and regeneration and renewing by the Holy Spirit, whom he richly poured out upon us through Jesus Christ our Savior. I'm not sure, is that?
Yeah,
that's the bulk of it.
Fine,
okay.
Yeah.
So what I see is he's saying, live a good and quiet life.
Agreed.
Yeah, and in particular, even showing every consideration, even to non-believers, for all people, whom he says, you were once similar, right? We too were once foolish, disobedient, etc.
The polite to all people is right, but there also was the rulers and being obedient.
That's right, yeah. But
I don't think he's saying that if they tell you to murder your baby, go murder your baby. I think they say, no, we're not going to do that.
Correct, yeah.
But that, I think what it assumes is when he lists what they were, those words, you have to think, those words reflect what the leaders are doing.
See, and I see
it
as I read it as the end. I'm showing you here.
Okay.
At the end of verse 2, slander no one, not to be contentious, gentle, showing every consideration for all people, for we too were once foolish.
Right.
So this is the all people.
Too. Well, and I agree that it's all people.
Okay.
But also that it's the leaders, subject to rulers, to authorities.
Yeah.
As well as all people.
See, when I read this,
the same ground is for both categories.
I'm not against it, and maybe we're making a mountain out of a molehill a bit, but not you, but I'm saying our disagreement is pretty minor in the sense that when being subject to rulers, to authorities, it's like saying to your son, if you get pulled over, you're respectful to the police, right? If you disagree with what he says, you say yes, sir, and you go along with it, and you can take it up with the judge.
That's right.
And what he's doing is he's saying this is the right way to live.
Even if he goes and bashes your tail light.
That's right.
Clearly, things of malice, hateful, hating one another, whatever, enslaved to various lusts and pleasures. He's operating outside of what a good police officer would do.
Correct. Yeah. If that were to happen,
you still, as long as he doesn't ask you to do anything morally wrong, you submit to that.
Yeah.
Because look, you were once like this also. And the same argument with your neighbor as well.
So how does that connect to like someone saying to a political ruler, how dare you?
Well, it doesn't, strictly speaking, except that the how dare you is an element of indignation, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's legitimate. But I think this provides another emotional response pattern.
So it's sort of like do everything out of love, even if it includes rebuke. You still, if it's not loving, it's selfish.
I would say this. It's what you said. I don't disagree with the indignation component.
Yeah.
But what I would add is that there are other components of motive that call for different responses. And your job is to discern when the indignant reply is the appropriate one.
Right.
And when the submit to them, even though they're asking for foolish things to be done, as long as they're not asking you to do a moral wrong,
right,
submit to this because they're wicked like you once were.
And I think an important point you're making, which I totally agree with, is the Bible never displays aggressive indignation to a foolish non-believer who just does what foolish non-believers do, right? So if your neighbor who knows no better is cheating on their wife or getting a
agree with
divorce
that.
or even blaspheming God,
Yeah.
to scoff and disgust, to exhibit this kind of self-righteous superiority is totally wrong. You're called to lovingly exhort them and invite them to know God and do right, right? What Jesus, I see, reserves his disdain for, not just Jesus, but also John the Baptist, like we're talking about, many of the prophets of the Old Testament. Their disgust is reserved for people in influence
I
who are
agree with
exerting
this.
that influence
Yes.
in
general,
ways that degrade
that's where we
the
see it.
population.
Yeah.
I actually have been thinking a lot, and this isn't on our list, but it jumps me to this Balaam's error. The story of Balaam, who was a prophet of God, but for hire. And he was hired by the enemies of God's people to try to curse them.
Yes.
And he said openly, I can only say what the Spirit of God tells me. And yet still the angel comes to put the fear of God in him, and yet he persists, right?
Yeah.
And the backstory is because he was later killed in judgment. He was killed in battle as God's judgment, it says later in
Yeah,
Scripture.
that's right.
And
'Cause
his
his
error,
intention.
and his error is mentioned in 3 times in the New Testament, all at the end, speaking about the end times. So Jude, 2 Peter, and Revelation.
Yeah.
And what Balaam did was, he said to the ruler who hated God's people, I can't curse them because they're righteous and before God, God's blessed them. But here's how you get them. You tempt them into sexual immorality, right? And what I think, and so the Bible is talking about these rulers of God's people, these pastors who are falling into Balaam's error and saying, it's okay if you're sexually immoral, it's okay. And their rationale is, I want to be kind, I want to be
Especially
gentle.
the Revelation passage.
But it's leading people to this destruction.
Yeah. I agree.
It's a heavy one.
On the, so I'm in agreement that indignation is reserved more firmly for leaders.
Yeah.
And the way Jesus interacts with them, even, and Elijah was the same, and John the Baptist is the same. All 3 of those examples.
Yeah.
However, I think there's 2 examples that show that that's not an exclusive response pattern.
Okay.
And that is both Paul and Jesus responding to a high priest when they didn't realize it, and a high priest pursuing an evil course.
Giving them honor as the high priest.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in a sense, submitting to them. They're not at those times being asked to do anything wrong, but they submitted to this leader implementing what the leader should not have been doing and knows better.
And I think that's where Christians, pastors in particular, I have a hard time when they just flippantly disgrace Joe Biden, right? And let's go Brandon and all that nonsense, right?
Yeah.
It's fun and it makes sense, but it's you're sinning.
Yeah.
You're speaking ill of the leader of your people. And it's a sin.
Yeah. Okay.
All right,
Good ground, good conversation on that. Christian warfare, we're going to keep chipping away at it, right?
I like it. I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to do one more piece?
Well, so I do have one more, but before I do, I want to say this podcast is a part of the Trinity School. It's a culture building enterprise that includes education, influence, industry, and the arts. And if you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School, we have a small micro school in my home, but we're also expanding it out into a business and industry and things like this. If you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School, building communities that honor Christ, you can donate to our efforts by going to gracestaten.com/Trinity School, or check us out online. We're in a bunch of places.
Okay.
All right, I wanted to make a recommendation with a caveat. All right, so I have a TV show I want to recommend, but I'll say it's a TV show that my wife doesn't want to watch. Okay, partly because
I don't want to watch
gruesome.
Dexter.
It's gruesome, but this is a good. It's called Barry, and it's similar to Dexter in the sense that it is quite a bit of violence and it's gruesome, and it's portraying real evil.
Yeah.
The thing I don't like about Dexter is, and I don't watch any shows that are serial killer centered, even if it's the bad guy or whatever.
Never made it past.
There's
10
a
minutes.
weird glorification of the serial killer right now that's tantalizing in a way that I won't even participate.
That's right. I agree.
Barry is this conflicted character who, the premise is really funny, and the show actually has a lot of really dark humor, is a war veteran, U.S. war veteran in Afghanistan, who's traumatized and struggling with his trauma. He decides to go be a Hollywood actor. And he falls into crime to sort of make his living as a hitman. So he's actively living out this, I need to come to grips with the trauma and the hurt that's in my heart, but then I'm making it worse by going out and participating in organized crime. And I think this show, I just finished the last season, it's 4 seasons. I think it does a good job of really facing the hard conflict of what sin is, that I continue to do what I don't want to do, and yet I want something better.
How would you compare it to Breaking Bad?
Well, I feel like Breaking Bad That's a good question because I didn't make it very far in Breaking Bad.
I've not done one episode, and I can't.
I did 3 because I had so
3
many
episodes?
people. 3 episodes, and that's I
I
usually
know everybody says to do it. Bryan Cranston, genius. I'll give it to
maybe
them.
he
I can't
is.
watch it
No, and what I found in Breaking Bad is and I'll give any show 3 episodes
because
usually.
I think Breaking Bad is the development of the fall of a fall.
That's right. Yeah. See, what I see in this is the development of a struggle to make right and yet helpless in the face of evil.
That's interesting.
It also, when I watched Breaking Bad, I just couldn't root for anybody. It
Yeah.
was like, I don't like any of these people.
So Barry is different in the sense that there is an element of good in this that keeps you. It's the divided Roman 7 man.
You openly see in Breaking Bad, you're watching Bryan Cranston's character
Yeah.
devolve into
That's right.
I don't even care anymore.
Yeah, I can't.
And what I see
couldn't
in
do.
Barry is this character. He is devolving, but he's devolving into inner conflict, saying,
It's getting
I don't
worse.
want this, and yet I
Yeah.
keep doing it.
Man.
And
You
so
know, that's what happened to
it was
me
rich.
when I became a Christian. Is I was engaged in influence. Herbal influences,
Herbal.
and
It's natural, bro.
and I found I couldn't stop. I wanted to, and I started to hate it.
I heard it was non-habit forming.
Well, and this isn't in that frame. This is with a much milder doses in the 80s. But
Yeah.
I go to a class after lunch, in which I wanted to. And I enjoyed the class in school, and I couldn't unaffect yourself. You can't get out of
Yeah,
it
you
because
can't
you
turn it off.
decide you can't turn it off. And I hated it, and I wanted to then stop, and I couldn't stop. And I found out I was a slave, not to it in an addiction way, but to pleasuring myself. And that was a stupid thing to say. Living for pleasure, and
Enjoying yourself.
and I spent nearly a year hating. It grew in hatred that I couldn't stop
So
until it broke, and I admitted I'm a slave.
was it a crescendo? And here's what I mean. Did your desire to stop and the depth of your depravity both increase at the same time? Or did one diminish and the other increase? In other words, was it a gradual departure or was it an all at once, finally, I've had enough?
You have to say that again.
Okay, so a lot of people talk about hitting rock bottom.
Yes.
Right? That their desire to quit is increasing, but as it does, the actual participation in the sin also increases in power. And it's like you begin...
Mine didn't increase. I just couldn't stop. I
Okay.
couldn't stop. So, and I make a determination. I go to college. This is it. I'm going to make the break because I said it was my friend's fault.
Yeah.
When I'm away from these friends, I go to college and I'm at a party the first weekend.
Yep.
And I'm doing the same things.
Yeah.
And it jolted me. And then what happened is, because I have no exterior control, I have all exterior control, the home and being home. I'm staying up till 3 in the morning all the time. I start not going to class, and I've excelled at math and science, and I'm getting my first F because I don't go to class.
Yeah.
And my pride is broken, and I know why, and I give in. I gave up, and that's why I said I
Yeah,
give in.
yeah.
Lord.
And I would
can't
say
run my
Barry
life.
was kind of like that.
Yeah,
It's kind of this like spiral down and yet all the way to the end. It's really fascinating.
Can we
story.
end with one theme of the spiritual component of things?
Yeah.
And because we're probably at our time right now, and we have a teeny bit of leeway. I had just listened to, you had actually told me about it for different reasons, but a podcast called Haunted Cosmos, which has been incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
And for a number of reasons, but the reason I want to bring up here in this context is because they're working from a fundamental premise that you and I share.
Right.
And that is that there are spiritual forces, or I call it just spirit forces. We won't get into the word. The word spiritual has a range of meaning that kind of...
Interdimensional.
But interdimensional or spirit forces, so what we're talking about is not spirituality as an adjective,
Okay.
but we're talking about beings, a range of beings that are invisible to our eyes.
That are not
don't-
tangible.
Yeah, and they can become that, but they don't have to. So what Heiser would call God's first family, right?
Yeah.
Now, so they operate with this belief system that the scripture lays out, which we share. But then they take another thing that we haven't really done, you and I. And I don't know if we want to. I don't necessarily know that I want to. It's a lot of work and it's not as interesting to me. But the human experiences, just across the board, across nations, across eras and ages, decades and centuries.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the Mothman, they have a whole episode. This phenomena for like a year or 13 months in what happened. All
this
these
one
people
town.
in this one town, independent of each other, they see the same, and they tell all the stories because it's been written up. Another one would be, which I thought was interesting, what we were mentioning earlier about the spiritual forces will it lead to renewal, and that is they're talking about the black hat man and seeing in the shadows and this person, and they see the same thing, and they bring up the illustration of Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers.
Yep.
He just went to a New York Jets and broke his leg in the first game. Anyway, he goes on psychedelics down to South America, wanting to expand his mind, and he meets the black hat man.
Yeah.
And it terrifies him. And then the black hat man starts showing up in his life when he's not on psychedelics.
I heard this, and he's scared to go into certain rooms, training rooms
by himself.
Yeah.
And it is frightening to him. And he is a world-class athlete. He's incredibly wealthy.
Yeah.
He has all these things. And I just think that's interesting. There's a lot of factors of the interest level there with that. But this idea that the spirit forces they believe in, and then they're basically following up with human stories that share these threads. Because this black hat man has been over countless years and decades and being seen by others. And they have episodes, a sea serpent episode, all these accounts of seeing something in the ocean.
So are you saying that these stories of what seem to be real experiencing of haunted, strange, extra, right?
Yes, extra.
That they're connected to the Bible.
That's what they're attempting to do.
Okay.
And which I think is interesting because what they're trying to do is with this biblical assumption of spirit forces, there's this family.
Yeah.
And we don't know a lot about it. We only know a teeny bit. Then they're taking all these stories.
Right.
Especially the ones that tie together among multiple peoples, multiple places, and saying, well, these people did not all collude because there are stories that are not true.
Right.
There's fantastic.
There's going to be some, of course.
And they then draw this conclusion. This is why I use the word cosmic cartography. They're trying to combine this foundational belief with the nature of shared experiences and the threads that combine them to say, could this be a fuller speculative, but broader understanding of what's taking place and these spiritual forces? And the point then being so that you might be armed. And that gets back to then the question of, are we, as we repaganize, will we face a culture that becomes afraid? There's more there than they admit or thought. And it's frightening. And there's power. We won't get into the authority issue. There's power.
For sure.
Right? And as they come face to face with it, what will that mean? Could we have a renewal?
Right.
I think that's an interesting idea.
I think we should spend some time on this because, and in the next episode perhaps, because I've listened to a lot of this too. I do find it fascinating, and I have made some biblical connections, but I look at the New Testament, I look at most of the Old Testament, and it's just not there.
This is an interesting question.
Sea monsters and all this stuff, but there could be explanations to this, but it's a deeper...
I've been thinking about that exact thing, trying to hear what they're saying, and I like what they're saying, but then if I step away and cut it all off and think, but what does the Bible, how did it interact with this people? This component is minimized.
It is. And so is it minimized with intent?
Reason? Yes, that's
to
the
not
question.
give them glory, or is it that it's just not real?
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's an option.
Yeah. Well, let's wrestle with it next time.
Well, and then, so here's what I want to mention on that. Scooby-Doo. Watching this, you know what that reminded me of when I was listening? I listened to several of them today because I was out and about. That's what Scooby-Doo
It's always a hoax in the end, though.
It's Scooby-Doo is in the 60s when a bunch of this stuff happened.
Okay, right. The Mothman and all that.
Scooby-Doo, Mothman being one of them, it's always exposed to be a human actor. Always.
Right.
It appears to be supernatural.
Okay, so next time we talk, I want to talk about that because I have a connection to the Salem witch trials. Yeah, and I think it could be really interesting.
Do I have time for one more question that's on this thing?
No.
I might ran out.
Yeah, we got to go.
Man, this was my favorite question too. Okay.
Okay, next time. All right, so you've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, and if you enjoyed this episode, you found something to reconsider or something you've never even thought about, I want you to go ahead and share it with a friend, and then go have a good conversation, and remember to think again.